This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production.
Welcome back, everyone. You are listening to Season 2 of Ivy Unleashed. Today, we are diving into a topic that Andrea and I are obsessed about, and we found out that you all are too.
Yeah, we are constantly asking our listeners, what do you want to hear about? What are you interested in? What do you have questions about? And the number one topic has been anxiety. And so we were kind of waiting for the perfect person to fall in our lap, and it happened. We started following Amber Benziger on Instagram because her posts were so helpful. And now we have her here. Welcome to Ivy Unleashed, Amber.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk about all things anxiety.
Yeah, and I know this is what you do, but I feel like now it's such a huge topic. I feel like I'm so glad there's people like you that are passionate about helping people, because the way that you break things down is so helpful, tangible, relatable, and you as a psychotherapist even say like therapists need therapists. So I just want to thank you for being so vulnerable and open and smart and helpful. And we have a lot of questions, so I feel like we should really just jump in and get to it.
Yeah. I'd love to know, Amber, for personal reasons and also for our listeners, what got you so passionate about anxiety and doing this work?
So I've struggled with anxiety for a large portion of my life. I didn't think I realized what it was when I was younger, but I've always been kind of an anxious child, and really had those perfectionist tendencies. And then I knew I wanted to go into therapy. I wanted to be a therapist. So I was in undergrad and I had my first panic attack, and I didn't really know what was going on. I thought like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And I happened to work at my counseling center on campus, and I went there and I was like telling them, they're like, Amber, you had a panic attack. And I was like, what is this? And like, I just really dove into what that was and what that meant and how to help myself at that point. Because I was struggling with some medical issues. I like got diagnosed with a thyroid condition, and I was in my 20s. I didn't know what that was. So there was just so much anxiety. And then I think that I kind of fell in love with that topic and helping people through trying to figure out how to help myself.
Yeah, that's something we're finding a lot of in the people we talk about. They have such a personal connection to it, right? Like the reason I do this work is because of my health, and similar to other people and guests that we've had on. So thinking about that experience to where you are now, walk us through day to day what your work looks like.
I think every day it looks a little bit different, and that's been amazing. So I now have a private practice, and I've had that for it'll be 3 years in January. And I specialize in working with women who are struggling with anxiety and trauma. So I see, around 15 clients a week there. And then I also have my membership service where I work with women in more of a group type setting who are experiencing anxiety. So I talk about anxiety most of the time.
Yeah.
And as well as just like, again, working on my anxiety and everything that's going on around in the world can be a really anxious time. So there's that. I'm a wife and a mom, so I'm doing that. So, every day looks different, but focusing on the same thing, trying to help people and myself cope and mental health.
Yes. And so just to kind of start with the word anxiety and what it is, just kind of the basic scientific facts about it. Can you kind of just break down what anxiety is and how it feels in the body?
Yeah, sure. So everybody has anxiety. And I think that's what we don't realize because, right, the first thing that anybody usually says when they come to me is like, I have anxiety, make it go away. And then the first thing I say is, I'm sorry to, inform you, but it won't go away. And you don't want it to, right? Because the easiest way to think about it is it's your body's smoke alarm, right? It's telling you that something's going on, something's wrong. It's warning you. The thing about it is when you have like an anxiety disorder or you're suffering or, experiencing overwhelming anxiety, it's kind of alerting you that something is wrong even when it's not. And that can feel really overwhelming. A lot of times it makes you feel out of control. You can feel it a lot of times in your body, like we talked about. So through panic, there's sweating, there's, rapid heart rate, there's increase of, like breathing deeply or heavily, having trouble sleeping. You can have GI issues. Then there's like those ruminating thoughts that you can get. So it can show up in different ways, but it usually kind of feels like this impending doom or, increased amount of fear that we're constantly experiencing and feel like we can't get it to stop.
Yeah. And I know multiple people that wake up and instantly have panic, or they instantly have fear, and they instantly have this physiological overwhelm before they even have thoughts. And so I think sometimes what's confusing me about anxiety is what comes first? Like, is it your thoughts that are creating it? Does your body just naturally create it? I know for me personally, I never had anxiety until I had a baby. And then I had all of these worries, but then I was like, well, of course I do have a baby. And so it was easy to kind of have it go undiagnosed, right? And then once I felt better, it was like, oh, I was super anxious. That was anxiety. And so I'm curious, like, how many people are walking around just undiagnosed with like severe anxiety, thinking they're just overthinkers or big worriers?
Probably a lot, right? Because a lot of times those type of things, especially like overthinking or perfectionism or just like wanting to do the right things, or always trying to think about that, that's like celebrated in a way. So people don't think like that's something wrong. It's like, oh, you're just a go-getter. Oh, you're an overachiever. Oh, of course you're a new mom, so you're going to have some anxiety. You're going to have some worry. It's fine. Just, you'll get used to it. So then a lot of times we suppress things or we avoid and we don't talk about them. And yes, some of those things are very normal. Obviously, when you have a kid, you're like, I don't know how to do this. So there is some anxiety. But when it's starting to like become this excessive thing and really change the way that you're showing up for yourself and your children, then maybe that is something to talk about. I think sometimes those things are swept under the rug. So I would say there's probably a large amount of people that are walking around and just thinking like this is normal and not realizing that they might be struggling in silence.
I'm curious where you separate anxiety or having anxiety, or you have anxious thoughts, and the kind of the separation between that, right? Not wanting to identify with anxiety because then you're allowing that to kind of cultivate even more.
Like, are you manifesting?
Yeah,
like that anxious. If you think you're an anxious person, are you manifesting more of it?
Yeah, and like you said, Amber, everyone has anxiety, and so at what point does it become an issue?
Like, yes, everybody does have those anxious thoughts. Like, that's normal because it kind of keeps us safe. But when we start to fear things or we start to feel overwhelmed about things that aren't really fearful, and it starts to keep us from doing things that maybe that we normally do. So like maybe we're afraid of driving, or we become fearful around, being with our children alone, or we feel like we're spending so much time overthinking and it's getting in the way of the things that we're doing. Or that we're not doing. We're second guessing ourselves. It's affecting our quality of life. That's where it's like, okay, is this real? Am I spending a lot of time excessively worried about everything or these particular triggers, or, so it's a good time to kind of do self-reflection. But a lot of times we're like, ooh, this feels terrible. So we try to like avoid it and do other things and push it away. And then we see it come back in either more aggressively or in like a physical form because we're making ourselves ill or we burn ourselves out. So I think it's really being able to step back and say like, wait a second, am I spending my time excessively worried? Have I been having sleepless nights for like a month straight and just, popping melatonin and keeping it moving? Is there something really going on?
Yeah. And with that self-reflection, you as a therapist, how do you promote that with people? Like, how do you get them or influence them to tune into what are you saying to yourself? Like, what are these worries sounding like?
Yeah. So one of my biggest things is always saying, and it's everywhere, even probably on my social media, it's like, feel your feelings. And people are like, what the heck does that even mean? And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I get why that's like so annoying to hear, but it's true. So like when that stuff is coming up for you, adopt that curious mindset of like, what's going on? Why is this showing up for me? What's the fear, or what am I afraid of? And is this really real? And starting to separate like the feeling from you. Because a lot of times people with anxiety will like adopt it as their personality. Like, I'm anxious. So like, and it's kind of like, I'm anxious, so this is why, instead of stepping back and being like, no, I'm feeling anxious about this. Like, this is my anxiety showing up. This is just my fear. This, this isn't factual. Like, say, a friend doesn't text you back right away. That can make you anxious as a person. Like, okay, maybe they don't like me, maybe I did something wrong. Instead, like, I'm feeling really anxious right now because I miss my friend, or I need my friend, or I'm feeling really lonely. This is just my anxiety. So learning how to put that step in between instead of allowing that thought to continue to ruminate. And that takes practice, because especially if you're doing it consistently, we're not just going to be able to get that one time, right? So it's really that stop and think and allow yourself to kind of move through that. So, I walk through people through that exercise of like, okay, let me stop and think and separate. Journaling is really great. Whip out any piece of paper and just like writing like all the excessive thoughts that you're having right now, and then kind of reading back. And most of the time it's like, wait, is this even true? And sometimes in those moments, we don't have the time, right, to stop and get out my journal. Like, you know what I mean? When you're busy, as a mom, if I'm feeling anxious about something, my kid doesn't care if he wants his peanut butter and jelly right now. So I can't be like, hold on, I need to whip out my journal because I'm anxious. So sometimes it's good to have like, I always call it like scheduled worry time, where like, okay, maybe I'm driving to work for this 10 minutes. Like, I'm going to kind of think about all those things that are going on and give myself that time to like work it through. And what usually happens is by the time I get to that time, maybe those things actually weren't real worries, and I was kind of just thought they were in the moment. And then when I get to the scheduled worry time, I wasn't, or I didn't need that much time to worry because I was able to say like, wait, this isn't real. This isn't really impacting me the way that I thought I did. Or this is something that I can't control. So I need to have acceptance that this is happening.
I think about control a lot. I think, people in my life that I know struggle with anxiety also struggle with feeling like they have to control everything. If you control your environment, you think ahead, you troubleshoot everything, it'll make your anxiety go away. And so that's definitely one question we got from our listeners, is thinking about control. And how do I know if I'm being over controlling because of my anxiety, or I'm just trying to make things cohesive? Like, how do you know the difference between being over controlling versus just living your life and trying to be prepared?
I think that's the biggest question that I get to, or when people are coming to me in my practice of, and they're saying like, I feel really anxious, I feel out of control, because everybody wants that sense of security, that sense of control. So usually my question back is, well, what are you trying to control? Is it in your control? Because a lot of times we think that we have control over a lot of things. And I think one thing that 2020 taught us was that we really don't have control over much, right? We only really have control over how we are reacting and how we are showing up for ourselves. So kind of taking that step back and saying like, do I actually have control over this, or what can I actually control in this scenario, and practicing that piece of self-acceptance. And when I say that, I mean accepting that reality is its actual reality. I'm not saying that we have to like it, right? If there's a breakup, like no one likes that feeling. But instead of sitting there and going through like, well, could I have done this? Should I have said this? What about this? And trying to control that situation, or if, someone's not talking to you, trying to control that situation or how somebody else reacted, we can't do that, right? So it's accepting like, this is what happened in that moment, and what can I do? I can allow myself to grieve. I can allow myself to miss that person. I can give myself extra space. So like, what is it that you can actually control, and shift the focus to that?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is a lot of labeling, right? Labeling your emotions, labeling what you can control. It's really that first step. And what we always talk about is awareness, is quieting that outside noise, turning inward to even allow yourself to ask yourself these questions of, how am I feeling? And it takes time, it takes work. And I'm thinking about just personally my journey, right? I went from debilitating anxiety, didn't want to get out of bed, couldn't get out of bed, called in sick to work all the time, I didn't think there was any way out. And then through healing and doing some hard work, I think about how prevalent anxiety is right now with everything going on in the world. And people want easy. They want quick fixes. They want a pill. And right, I talk to my clients all about mindfulness and meditation and calming your nervous system and all of these things that I've put into practice that I've learned that truly help. And it's still such a big question. And I do believe in medication. I believe the use of it to help bridge that gap, right? To make it seem like you have control or can gain some sort of agency back in your life. But I would love to get your perspective on medication and that role between identifying your feelings, labeling them, working through it with a therapist, or getting on medication. What you recommend?
Yeah, so I really think it is a personal choice and a choice that you should make with your medical provider and your therapist together. I think that can really be helpful. I don't think that medication has to be forever. I do think it has some place for certain people, especially if you are really stuck in this, ruminating thought or thought storm, or you're coming off of maybe some type of traumatic event, or you're just like, I cannot stop this right now. I think that medication, like you said, can be that bridge for you until you can have those coping skills in place and be able to calm your anxiety in that way and maybe not need it and maybe taper off of it. And that's always how I talk to my clients about it. Because, for some people, medication can be scary and a lot of people don't want to go on it and they feel like it can be a crutch, but it doesn't have to be a crutch. It might just, like you said, I think bridge is the perfect word. It might just be that bridge to, the other side for you while you're learning and implementing and putting those things into practice, especially if you feel like you're really, really struggling in that moment. Why allow yourself to kind of suffer when you could do something that will help you get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm thinking about when you do have those coping skills, exactly what you said, you feel like you're in a place where you can taper off. Thinking about how do people know when they are in that right space, right? Is it the medication that's allowing them to feel at ease and then they taper off and they're like, because I've been there. And so I'm curious your thoughts on that. And then also like the long-term effects of it and affecting our brain chemistry and thinking about the natural ways versus medication. Is there the right amount of time to be on it? Is there the right way to taper off of it?
I get that a lot too. Like, well, I'm feeling great now, so I should just go off of it. And like people just stop, right? But are we feeling great because we're on the medication? And are we being honest that we actually have these coping skills and strategies and we're actually using them? So I think, again, it goes back to that self-reflection. I think it's actually being really honest with yourself and your providers about what is going on and then tapering it off the right way, right? Because there's like, I can taper myself off, which wouldn't be correct, or doing with a medical provider and like seeing how you're feeling and then talking with your therapist, and you'll be able to see that. In my own personal experience, I've taken medication and not taken medication multiple times in my life based on things that I needed or times that I needed them. And I think that was really the key, was being super honest and reflective with myself and honest with the medical provider and trusting them. So I think it's knowing that you are in the hands of somebody that you trust and knows you and you feel comfortable with, and that you're going to be honest with yourself, like if this isn't working or if you're in the place that you can, wean off, not yourself, wean with a medical provider.
So I'm thinking about when you're deciding whether or not to get on medication. I know something that stops a lot of people or stops them once they've started. They don't give it enough time to have the benefits of it. So have you seen that where people either don't start or they do start and they get off it too early because they just don't give it time to serve its purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm not a medical provider. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't prescribe medication, but I do work with a lot of clients that are on medication. And I think that's one of the first things that we talk about. Like, if we're going to do this, you need to give it that like 14 days, that 2 weeks, that month to really let it take effect and see if it's going to happen. to see what's going to happen and how it's going to affect you. Because I think a lot of times it's like, oh, again, like you spoke about in the beginning, well, we want this quick fix. So like it didn't work right away, or I feel sick, or I feel like nauseous. Now, of course, if you're having some type of adverse reaction or some horrible negative side effect, of course, you should go to your doctor and get off of it. But I think a lot of times people are like, oh, this isn't working, so I don't want to take it. And I think that kind of is a disservice to yourself, right? We didn't give it the time that it needs to try to see if it would be helpful to you, or maybe that wasn't the right one and maybe you need to try something else. And I think that can be scary too. So I think my biggest advice is finding someone that you really trust and being honest with them and making sure that they're being honest with you, answering all of those questions, because there are so many different medications. And I know people can be fearful about, being, addicted or things like that. So really asking all of those questions, like whatever questions you have, I always say, go unprepared. There's never a dumb question or too many questions. Like, this is you and your health and your care. And especially if you're an anxious person, right? You want to know. So come in with all of those things. And I think making sure that you're there leaving understanding what the medication is, why you're on it, what your plan is, and what the side effects are. Because I think it's really interesting to me when I meet people and I'm like, oh, you're on this medication. What is it for? And I don't know. That's scary to me. So making sure that you know enough about what's going on with you and your care and being really hands-on and a part of that. And then if you're working with not only a medical provider, but like a psychotherapist like myself, making sure that, it's a team and those two people are collaborating and talking about what's going on, and you're a part of that too.
I love how when you talk about medication, you're also talking about the fact of working with someone, right? You're not doing it alone. You're also including different coping strategies. It's not like I take this pill and it's good. Like, you're still building these skills to help you when you are in different situations, and it's not that quick fix. And so when you talk about coping strategies, we touched a little bit about journaling, and I'd mentioned mindfulness and meditation, but I'd love to hear some of the strategies, coping mechanisms that you recommend and you work with your clients on.
Yeah. So I'm a huge advocate for journaling. So we've mentioned that already, and I will shout that from the rooftops. I'm also a huge advocate for grounding techniques, especially when you're in those moments of panic or those ruminating thoughts, right? It's really hard to just stop and be like, I'm going to whip out my journal. Like, no, you're having this visceral reaction. So being able to bring yourself back to the present. So if that's even running your hands under cold water to kind of shock your nervous system and bring yourself back and be like, okay, now I can move through that. Like, I can separate the anxiety. I can walk myself through no, this is just my anxious thought. I'm just fearful of this happening. Deep breathing when you can. When you're in the middle of a panic attack, that's not the best time to do that because you'll hyperventilate. So there's muscle tensing and relaxation. So clenching your fist and then releasing and focusing on that to bring yourself out of, like I said, those anxious thoughts. So I'm really into those different types of grounding techniques. I always, tell people to kind of have a couple of things with them, kind of make a coping kit. So for me, I have a little lavender, essential oil rolling ball that I like to smell, because lavender helps me calm down, and many people, or a stress ball. So just having something to help myself ground myself in those moments where I'm feeling really overwhelmed or anxious. Music is a good one. I know when the pandemic started, I had a lot of clients, and myself included, I didn't like going to the grocery store or Target or anything. I was super anxious, just because of all the uncertainty and people. So I'd pop in my earbuds and go into the store, and I had my anxiety playlist. I have a playlist for every emotion. And it would help me to feel okay, I'm just in my own head instead of oh my gosh, what's all the things going around. So I was able to focus on that. So music's really great. Reaching out to that person, whoever that person is that you've identified, and really allowing them to support you in the way that you need. I think it's really important for people to have that support system and being like direct and honest with that support system. So they know like, okay, you're feeling anxious right now. You need space, or you need a hug, or you just need someone to listen to you vent. So having that for you. And then of course, I think therapy is a great coping strategy, because what other time do you have that's a full hour where you're talking about yourself and that person's also focused on you? I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. What is it about journaling that is so powerful?
Journaling allows you to tap into those feelings and have that level of introspection that we don't just normally have, right? Because you're sitting there and you're writing and you're able to get it all out. And it's that time between just you and the paper. And it's this reflection. So there's nobody there to kind of critique you or whatever. And you can kind of get it all out, and it helps you not to avoid. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And you're also able to track. You can track like symptoms, like, oh, if I look back, I can see like I've been super anxious for the past, 3 weeks on my drive to work. So what's going on? Is it driving? Is it work? Is there an employee that I don't like? You know what I mean? So you can be able to track that. So that's really helpful to learn patterns for yourself. So it kind of just gives you this ability to kind of look outside yourself and capture it. And it's also really great because like if you are in therapy, maybe you're going to take that to therapy, or maybe there's something you missed, or sometimes, we'll get there and be like, I don't have anything to talk about. Well, then why have I been journaling about how like I can't stand my next door neighbor? Like, what's that about? You know what I mean? So it's a great place for reflection.
Do you feel like with journaling, you could see your progress, and it could help with your mindset of, I am working on this and it's getting better. I'm using my support system to kind of propel you even more forward to healing or reducing your anxiety?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I definitely think you could see, okay, this is working for me, or this isn't working, or I've been making progress in this area, or I've been doing this and I've been feeling less anxious. So I think it's a great way to see how far you've come. And sometimes it might just be like a bunch of nothing. I know like before I go to bed, I do like a brain dump of just every random thought that's in my head, because trouble sleeping is something that I struggle with, because I feel like I have all these thoughts right before I hit the pillow. So trying to just get them all out. And then sometimes the next morning I'll read them back and be like, what was that? But I needed that because I just needed to get all those things out. So I think it really depends on like what you need. And I want to hit home on that because I think there's no particular way to do it. Some people like prompts, and sometimes I like those at certain times. I think it's doing what you need in the moment. Some people want to do it, type things out, put it in their note section. Some people want to write it. So what do you feel most comfortable with, and what do you need?
You just touched on sleep, and sleep is a huge, everybody has had a moment where they've struggled with sleep, right? But I do think anxiety and sleep go hand in hand. So many people talk about, my thoughts just go wild when I hit the pillow. And so I'm assuming that's probably something you hear a lot about, but I would love just tips for our listeners on ways to cope with those ruminating thoughts at bedtime, ruminating thoughts, period, and especially too when you're trying to go to sleep. So
my big thing is creating a routine and make it very short and sweet, right? Like don't do like this whole 15-step process. I usually say like make it like 3 steps or less. So you're kind of preparing your body, right? A lot of times we're like, oh, I can't sleep. So we grab electronics because that's easy. But then you're re-stimulating yourself. So just like when you have a baby and you're kind of like giving them a bath and giving them a bottle and laying them down, like they're getting ready. They know that these are the cues for sleep. So doing that for yourself, is that washing your face, doing an adult coloring book, and journaling before bed, like whatever it is for you to start calming yourself down, decreasing electronics at least an hour before bed. I know people don't like to hear that, but it is true. Because like the blue light, and again, stimulating yourself and what you're reading and seeing, because we always think about like what we're ingesting food wise, but like what are we ingesting, like social media and seeing and taking all that in. So that really is important, especially before bed. And if you feel like you're just laying there and you're like, okay, I'm up, like I've been laying here for an hour, I would say like reset. Go get up, go into the bathroom, go to the bathroom, wash your hands, wash your face, and try again. So like allowing yourself to, okay, I'm going to shake this off and then I'm going to try again and lay back down. Sometimes that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, we had on Dr. Danielle Haran about sleep on season 1, and she recommended getting out of the room, that by staying in bed, we are associating being awake with being in our bedroom. Mm-hmm. Same idea of working in bed and all these things, like having your bed be just for sleep. And, you know, I do have some clients who will say, I don't want to journal because then that re-stimulates me. And I'm like, that's fair. Yeah. But I will say that I heard something a while ago and it stuck with me, and I unfortunately don't remember who it's from, but it's that our brain is not a notepad and that we have to get it out, and we have to, you know, I think it helps with just processing it, getting it out. But what I'm curious of is you have these exercises that you can do, but for a lot of our listeners who have a significant other that's laying right next to them, what do you recommend so that you don't disrupt them, or having these open and honest conversations of, hey, I'm struggling with anxiety, when maybe your partner doesn't understand? Like, how do you, I think it's different for me than it is for Andrew, because I'm just chilling in my apartment by myself. I can have this sanctuary of healing, right? Where Andrew has little kids running around. And so when you don't have just you to worry about, what do you recommend?
My husband is like very chill. So he's just like goes to bed, doesn't need anything, where I'm like, I need all of these things. So I think it is having that conversation of like, I'm struggling with my anxiety, and then really talking to that person about what it's like for you, right? Because anxiety has become, I feel like in mental health in general, kind of can become these like buzzwords, like I'm anxious, I'm depressed, and people are like, okay, but they don't know what that means. So I think when you're trying to explain it to somebody, especially someone that cares about you and loves you, explain how it shows up for you. Like, I feel really anxious and it keeps me up at night. I feel really anxious and I'm having trouble going to the grocery store because there's a lot of people. Because they can understand that. Like, wow, you're struggling with this. How can I help you with this? Is usually the response. And then what is it that you're asking of them? Like, I think we have to think about that too. So sharing like how it really affects you, what that means for you, and in the most like simplest direct terms, like, I can't sleep at night. I am hyperventilating. I'm trying not to yell at the kids because I'm so agitated, right? A lot of times people are very irritable or can get angry when they're anxious and they don't realize. They just think like, oh, I'm being a jerk. So do I need to like tap out and you tap in with parenting for a minute because I'm overly anxious? So what is it that you need from that person? And being really direct and asking them, hey, can you show up for me in this way? Because I'm struggling with this. And same thing with bedtime. Like, hey, do you mind if I keep my side light on for a minute because I need to journal before I go to bed, or like I can't sleep? So just kind of incorporating them in your routine by letting them know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And why.
Like honest communication sounds like. And that's another question a lot of people had was, you know, I don't have anxious thoughts, or I don't feel anxious. And how am I supposed to be there for someone that is? And I think that's a great tool to say, you know, ask them how they're feeling, ask them what it's like for them, ask them what the thoughts are. And I think a lot of times when you don't understand it for people, you're like, oh, just relax. Why are you thinking about that? Like, just chill out. So could you speak to that? Like, how helpful is it for someone to tell you to just relax?
It's not helpful at all. And many things that people say along those lines of toxic positivity, which is when you're giving these words of quote unquote encouragement, but they're really invalidating. And I know that they come from a really great place and a place of wanting to help, right? Like, don't worry about that. Or people have it worse than you and look at them, or like, you're going to be fine. Like, I know you're saying that because you care, but what happens is a lot of times when you have anxiety, right, you're already trying to avoid it. So if you're like, oh, great, this person doesn't care, like no one wants to hear what I have to say. So then that doesn't allow the person with anxiety to let it out. So they're keeping it in, and it kind of shuts down the lines of communication. So instead of saying things like, don't worry about it, or just calm down, say like, what do you need? Or, you know, how can I show up for you? Or are you okay? Something as simple as that. So they know like you want to listen. But also, before you do that, do you have the capacity for it? Right? Because sometimes you don't. So like, don't put yourself out there and offer to like, hey, what do you need? And then not show up. So, and sometimes you have to be honest with yourself, like, I can't do this, or I can't handle this right now. And saying that in so many words to that person, being like, I know you're really struggling right now. So am I. So I'm going to step away and give you some space, or this is what I can do for you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I can take the kids right now, because maybe you can't listen to them, but maybe you had a hard day at work too. So what can you do that's inside your capacity? Because just because we're capable of doing things all the time doesn't mean we have the capacity for it, because we all have stuff going on. So it's being honest with ourselves and being honest with that partner or that person in our lives on how we can support them, making sure that they know we want to, and this is how we're able to.
That was so beautiful. It just keeps coming back to honesty and and owning how you feel, not avoiding it. And that's something that I learned in my healing journey, is these coping mechanisms that I learned that I was using, right? Like alcohol or running, being go, and not sitting with my feelings and allowing myself to process them, because I didn't want to associate with being depressed or being anxious or needing attention, or, you know, all these things. Like, I don't want people to feel like they have to do something for me. I can do it on my own, this pride. There's a lot of shame around mental health and the stigma. And I think especially with anxiety and depression, I'm curious your thoughts on where that shame comes from, and how for people who it's really hard to be honest and own how we're feeling, right? Like, it's easy for us to say now, like, be honest with your significant others and be honest with how you're feeling. And people are like, I am shaking and I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to say, I don't even know what I'm thinking. Like, I don't even know how to say what I'm thinking. Like, what are some of like those first steps that people can start to do to like release that shame that's tied around from just feeling ugh?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times we are carrying that because you want to be okay, right? You don't want to be, especially in a partnership, like, you don't want to be the partner that has like the issues, or you don't want to be the friend that has the issues, or the one that's always complaining. So we think like, oh, we can't. And we're kind of told not to do that, right? We're told to just kind of push through and keep going, and that's how you succeed. So it's really kind of being able to shift your mindset away from that, and start thinking about like, what is important and what do I need? And how do I want to show up in my own life for myself and for the people around me? Like, what does that look like? What kind of person do I want to be? And what kind of people do I want in my life? And also, those times where we're at that heightened state, our nervous system is super regulated, isn't the time to go in, right? It's just like when we're fighting with our spouse. Like, that's not the time. You're not going to be like, right now, I am feeling, you're going to be like, what the hell are you doing? So that's not the time. So allow yourself to be realistic and be like, this isn't it. I need to walk away and gather myself in whatever way that looks like. Right. That's why I can't stand those type of sayings. That's like, don't go to bed angry. Like, no, maybe you need to do that. Maybe that is what you need in that moment, because you are not able to show up in the way that you prefer, or the way that is regulated, or the way that you need to, so that you can communicate effectively. So it's being honest, like we talked about with ourselves, right? Like, I can't do this right now, or this isn't it for me. And then coming back at that time after we've had that space to reflect, but also start small, right? So if you're listening to this and you're like, I cannot talk to my spouse about this, like, no way, like, they're not going to understand. Okay, then start with your best friend. Like, start with your mom, start with your cat. Like, I don't know where you need to start, but I think that's the thing. Like, figure out what's the baseline, who's the easiest person to talk to, who's the easiest person that makes you feel the most comfortable, and start there. And then you're going to build off of that. Like, okay, if you know that talking to your mom, because she's the one that's like, it's fine, like, I've had 5 kids and I've been through all this and you just need to get over it. Don't start with her, right? Start with your sister, start with the person that's going to be like, okay, like, I understand you're struggling. I don't I don't experience that, but I hear you, and kind of move up from there. And you're going to allow yourself to build that self-awareness and to become more compassionate with yourself and more confident in what it is that you're trying to say and get across.
I think too, I'm thinking about moms specifically, just how sometimes it's hard to ask for what you need, and I do think it's a practice. Like if it's something that in your nature is hard for you to do, or a learned behavior because you watched your self-sacrificing mom, or you watched, you see our culture so much like that, like give. And so it's very hard, I think, for parents to ask for what they need because they're just trying to care so much for their children. And so something that keeps coming to mind is, you kind of said like pausing and taking a moment. So you're not like reacting in the moment with anger when you're super irritable, feeling really anxious, and thinking about that pause, or asking. I think an easy thing to ask for would be like a break. Hey, I need 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. I'll be back. Like, who can get mad at that? Take that break to go breathe, or do whatever you need to do so that you can come back, think about what you're experiencing, and then use that as a practice to ask for help. Like, can I just take 5 minutes right now? And then you can, ask for more, or communicate more honestly about something that might be a little bit more challenging to say or to ask for.
Yeah. And I think we should think about the way that we would want our kids to do that, right? Like, I think that's the biggest thing. As parents, it's like, okay, we can't ask for help, or we can't look too vulnerable, or that we don't know what we're doing, but we would want our kids to do that. So why not model that for them? Like, hey, mom's going to take a break right now, or we're going to do this, because that's what we would want them to do. Or say, I'm asking your, dad or your grandma or whoever for help right now because I just have a lot going on. Like, when you're struggling, do you ask the teacher for help? Do you ask your sister for help? So I think we have to keep that in mind. Like, we're modeling that behavior. And do we want to keep passing down that hustle culture of like, just keep moving and deal with it to them, because they're watching us, right?
Yeah. And think about, by suppressing it, it's just coming back bigger and bigger, and like you're shoving more shit in the closet, and it's going to come out at some time,
Yeah. People to keep channeling it elsewhere. Like you mentioned, like, I feel like my whole life I might have had a little anxiety, and the second I felt uncomfortable, I'd go for a run. Yeah. So I'm like, did I suppress my anxiety by running? I think.
Or did you get out of your body?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think with suppressing it, you're not like everything you're saying, what I'm hearing is allowing yourself to feel these feels so that they can move through you, so they can get out of you, because trauma gets stuck, just like this belief that you're not worthy of voicing your needs, what you want and what's important to you and how you're feeling. I don't think a lot of it is we're not taught to say how we're feeling. It's, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And so exactly what you're saying, this hustle culture, we're bringing it out. And something that I found helpful is this idea, visualization of moving it through me, whether it's journaling, whether it's talk therapy, talking with a friend, my mom, running, exercise. And, looking back, a lot of that is some natural remedies. I'm curious if there's any other natural remedies that you recommend, right? Like you mentioned lavender, essential oils, or just kind of like some nuggets that people could grab that maybe they're not ready to talk about it, but they want to start releasing this pent up anxiety and just feelings.
Yeah, moving your body is a great way. So even if you're not a runner, maybe you want to go outside for a walk. I always say changing your scenery, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm sitting and I'm just ruminating on the thought in my office, I need to get up and leave my office. I need to change the scenery. Is it going outside for a minute? Is it just going to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water? So just physically being able to move is like, okay, let me clear my mind and kind of start over, or shift my focus. So I think that's a big one. Nature is a huge one for me. So I just like to be outside when anything I feel like I'm being overwhelmed. It's okay. Let me go outside. Grounding yourself in a favorite thing. So sometimes if I'm super overwhelmed, I'll go through my photos on my phone and look at my kids playing or pictures of vacation. Those are fun memories. Nostalgia is a big one. Like, okay, if I'm really overwhelmed and having a tough day, I'm maybe I'll sit and watch Dawson's Creek for the 18th millionth time. Because that's what I need to do in the moment, because I'm just feeling overwhelmed until I can, okay, let me just sit through this. This brings me comfort and calm. Now what's going on with me? Because sometimes you just need to do that for yourself. You need to bring yourself to this state of like, I'm okay, to be able to move through those emotions, because it is hard. That's probably why you're avoiding it, because it's not easy and it's something that you're struggling with. So it's allowing yourself to do it step by step, little by little, and remember that it's a process.
With all of these tips, can you use this during a panic attack? Or, what is a panic attack and what would you suggest during those moments?
So panic attacks are super physical in nature, right? Anxiety attack is where it's like that ruminating thought that's just going on and on and on, and we can't stop it until whatever that event happens. Like if the boss says, hey, meet me in my office at 4:00 and it's noon, you're thinking like, I'm going to get fired for 4 hours. You get to the office and he's like, you're doing great. And you're like, okay, now that ruminating thought's over. A panic attack is where it's like your chest is tight, you're sweating profusely, your heart's pounding, you feel like, oh my gosh, is this a heart attack? It's very, very physical in nature. And sometimes it can come without even really knowing what the trigger is. So in those moments, you're not going to really be able to think like, let me move through this emotion. It's kind of like allowing yourself to do that, but also trying to bring yourself back to that moment. So a lot of those grounding techniques that I talked about, people always talk about like grabbing an ice cube. Obviously, if you're work or some random place, you might not be able to do that. So doing that, like muscle tensing and relaxing, grabbing that essential oil for yourself. Some people like rocking, planting your feet on the ground. When I was in college, I was having a lot of panic attacks, and like Fireball or sour candies were really helpful to me if I'd pop one in my mouth, so I'd be able to focus on like that intense reaction and kind of get myself out of the panic, and then allow yourself to be like, okay, what's going on? What's showing up for me? I think can be really helpful. Deep breathing. I think there's breath work is awesome and I love it. I just always get worried about asking people to do like deep breaths during a panic attack in case you're already breathing really heavily, because then you could hyperventilate. So I would say to try to calm yourself down a little bit before you start breathing exercises.
Yeah, I think I found the most helpful deep breathing before bed to really calm down the nervous system, get in that parasympathetic, that rest and digest, which is just good. Or like before you eat, if you have digestive issues, that's been helpful for me. But also having these practices when you're not in an anxious state. Like that's when you need to do it, right? So everything you're saying, I'm like, yup, this is what I found. But starting your day off with the deep breathing to set that tone for your day of, okay, I'm going to be present. I'm going to be in the moment to help really eliminate, or not even eliminate, but just lessen those ruminating thoughts, and to be able to kind of snap out of it and asking yourself these questions of, is this really true? Like, is this really true? Is my boss going to fire me? Or do I have any control over that? Like, what is right or what is true?
And like, if you're practicing those things outside of those moments of panic, it's going to be a lot easier to go to them, like, and remember them in those moments of panic. A lot of times I say, like, what are your top 3 coping skills when you are overwhelmed or you're feeling super anxious, and put them in the note section of your phone. Because if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're like, I don't know what to do. And all the stuff that I talked about in therapy or wherever is out of my head. So what should I do? Like, you're like, oh, wait, I know, I wrote these down, even though it's something that is relaxing or calming or whatever to you. In those moments, like, you're not thinking about that. So having them readily available can be really helpful. And that's kind of why I talked about that, like, coping kit at the beginning. Really focusing on like the senses. So, smelling the essential oil, or maybe you have like a seashell that you like to carry around or something like that, that you can kind of, grab and hold and visualize, like, okay, I'm at the ocean if you can't be right at the ocean, or whatever that is for yourself. Knowing that, hey, I have it readily available or written down somewhere, can kind of bring a sense of calm just in that way of knowing it's there.
Speaking of tips on how to manage anxiety, I love your podcast. So on the Manage Mind podcast, you and Nikki talk a lot about being kind of like overachievers or perfectionists, and how that can play into your anxiety. And so I'm curious about that line of, like, using these techniques when you're feeling super anxious versus when you feel like you're overachieving or you need to be perfect or you have to have your house look this certain way. And so how do you determine like, I'm just being an overachiever versus I'm having anxious thoughts right now?
I think it's, questioning the intention, right, behind it. Am I being an overachiever, or is it because I really care about what other people think and I view my success based on the validation of others? Or do I base my productivity or my worth based on my productivity? So kind of like, and being intentional as to your why. Because I think a lot of times that's where those perfectionist overachieving tendencies come from. Is it because I want to do this because it really matters to me and I care about it? Or is it because of something else that I'm using to kind of fulfill me and putting all my stock in it? So I think it's, again, taking that step back, being able to kind of have that introspection and being really intentional about the choices that you make. And that's something that Nikki and I both are really passionate about because it's something that we're both very type A and we can both get stuck in those perfectionist tendencies. And even making the podcast was hilarious because we are that way. So just, being really intentional about like, why am I doing this? Why am I showing up? And why am I becoming so anxious and fearful? And why do I care so much about whatever that little thing is that I'm, fixated on?
I love how real you are with what you experience. You on Instagram will come on and have your post-therapy kind of reflection of yourself. And I just think, that's something Brooke and I do too, is we talk about our personal experience, what we struggle with, because I feel like it sets other people free of like, oh, it's not just me. I don't have to hide this. Like, we can all talk about it. We can kind of break the stigma down. And I feel like your podcast does that perfectly, where you're totally honest and vulnerable about your experience, what you struggle with. So I just want to thank you for having such a great podcast and sharing that with the world.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think it's so important for therapists to show up in really real ways. That's opposite kind of what we're taught to do. We're taught to be like these blank slates. And I think I get that. But how can I expect somebody to want to open up and be vulnerable if I am like super closed off? And obviously it's their therapy session is about them. So I'm not talking about myself, but I think like it's important to be a real human being. And I also think because I am so passionate about, eliminating mental health stigma, how could I not talk about my own experiences and just being human? I think that's really important. So I appreciate you saying that because that's really important to me.
I love, and I think it's so important how you talk about your humanness, because as humans, you can hold space for all of the emotions and to not sit in that emotion for too long. And you talk about the duality of gratitude and anxiety and normalizing multiple emotions. And so I'd love for you to share with the listeners like why that's so important and your view on that.
Yeah. So I came across this book by this popular influencer, and she wrote that, you can't be anxious if you're grateful. So you should just write down the things that you're grateful for. And it pissed me off because so many people were reading that and probably thinking that's true and then feeling so much shame because I guarantee that they still had some anxiousness, that they were still anxious even after they wrote down the things that you're grateful for, because you can be both, right? You can be, like you said, happy that, this person's in your life, but you can also be resentful for some of the pain that they caused you. There can be both. There is the duality of emotions, and you don't have to pick one, and you shouldn't be shamed into doing that. So I really want to bring that point home to people because I think we get shamed into a lot of things. And I think gratitude is such an amazing tool. And I always think that people think I don't, but I do. I just feel like there can be so much shame around it because it's like, oh, just write down the things that you're grateful for. Just do this gratitude list. Or, well, what are you grateful for? If people are upset or quote unquote complaining or too needy, you just have to think about what you're grateful for. Great. I am grateful for all these things, my husband and my family, but I'm also grieving and struggling right now during the holiday season. So I am both of those things right now. And that is okay. And I know that a lot of people are probably multiple things, and that is okay. So I really want people to understand that feelings aren't factual, but they are clues to like maybe that we need more of something or that something's going on. So if we don't allow ourselves to feel all the feelings, how can we move forward in our healing process?
Mm-hmm. I love what you said. They leave clues. That's so powerful. And that it's okay and it's needed to feel the feels and to be honest with how you're feeling. But what I'm hearing is that what it's not okay is to just sit there, right? You have to do these exercises to allow yourself to process what is going on. And I think by people saying, oh, just practice gratitude, oh, just do this, like that's also a form of shoving it down and not processing it too.
Yeah, it's just kind of like putting this shiny Band-Aid on it, but like it's a huge oozing, gaping wound. So like that doesn't, you know what I mean? There's all those things underneath and it makes you feel like something's wrong with you because you do have those things underneath. And it's so invalidating. So, it's important to know that there can be both and to really be able to practice and sit in that duality to help yourself move along your healing journey, because healing is so up and down. So like, even if you are grateful, some days you're going to be like, that is enough. But the next day, it might not be, and that's okay too.
I think about too how a lot of people don't know how to express their emotions, right? And as a parent, I think about how important it is to teach our kids to be able to express any emotion you're having, feel them, work through them. But a lot of adults didn't grow up that way. They didn't grow up feeling they could feel their feelings. And so doing this work or trying to get through your anxious feelings, it's easy to get stuck because you don't know how to express them. You don't feel like it's safe to speak it out into the world or how to practice that. And so what would you say to people that feel like, I know I'm feeling these things, I know there are these practices, I definitely know I need to communicate, but I don't quite feel ready or capable to express my feelings to anybody?
I say start with yourself. I think I grew up in a home where, or in an environment that no one really talked about how they were feeling. And I remember when I said I wanted to be a therapist, they looked at me like, what? And I'd always been like, you're so emotional. You're an emotional child. And I thought that was a bad thing. So I didn't know how to openly express those things, especially to outside people or people I was in a relationship with, because I thought like, that's not what you're supposed to do. And I think, so I've journaled since I was a little kid. And I think that's where it started for me, really being able to be like, okay, well, I'm not supposed to talk to anybody else about this, but like, I do feel all these things. So I got to do something. And I started to like write them down and kind of understand where they were coming from and allow myself to be like, oh, okay. Like I do feel that. I do feel that when that person says that. And like, that's okay. So starting there with yourself can be a really valuable tool. Being able to do it in your own way is really important. So if that's writing it down, or that's like just talking out loud or talking to yourself in the mirror or voice recordings, then that's where you start.
I love that.
That's so good. And you've given 1,000,005 tips that I hope everyone who's listening feels empowered, that there's something out of everything that you shared that they can grab and easily implement. And the key is to be honest, but also to be curious with yourself.
Yes.
Right? If you were to try talking to your cat, if you were to try putting an ice cube in your hand when you're feeling a panic attack, what would you notice? Because until you try, you don't know. And I think being curious with ourselves, it allows us to get that shame, just stop giving it so much power, right? When we're curious with ourselves, we don't have to have a stigma around it. It's just, I wonder.
Yeah. And I think too, taking the blame off of other people for your feelings, right? If you take that pause and you say, why am I so irritable? Is my husband pissing me off? Or is it 65 other things that happen? I didn't get enough sleep and I'm feeling nervous about this and I'm feeling sad about this and I'm taking it out on somebody that I love. If you pause to really, like you said, be curious without judgment on yourself, without judgment on other people, where is this actually coming from? Where can I start to process it a bit? How can I deep breathe during this moment? Go in your closet where you need to go, to pause and get curious without blaming yourself or others for what those feelings are.
Yeah. And if you implement any of these and let us know what you find. Like, we are walking the walk right with you. And like we said earlier, Amber's Instagram is incredible. We know you guys are going to want to know where to find her. And so, Amber, when people want to find you, where can they go? Where are you at?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at Amber_verse_anxiety. So Amber verse anxiety. I'm also on TikTok under that name, but I don't TikTok as much. So I'm more fun on Instagram. You can find me at theanxietylab.com for my membership service. You can find our podcast Instagram at the Managed Mind Podcast. So those are the places to find me.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about Anxiety Lab and what your membership services provide?
Yeah, so it is a membership service exclusively for women who are experiencing anxiety and want to learn how to cope and manage and feel validated and compassion, and all through self-compassion. It's really great. It's a small group. I'm going right now. It's a wait list, so it's closed, but I'm going to reopen it in the new year. During the pandemic, there was a lot of anxious women that were reaching out to me, and I'm a therapist in the state of New Jersey, so I can only see people in New Jersey. So I wanted a way to connect with people all over the world that were struggling. And I also felt really alone in my anxiety because a lot of the coping strategies that I had, I wasn't able to access. So I wanted to create a place where we could all kind of support each other. And that became the Anxiety Lab.
That's beautiful.
So amazing. Oh, I'm so glad we got connected to you. Yes. The universe just puts the people in your path right when you need them. So Thank you for being with us.
Yes.
And sharing your gold. This has been amazing.
All right, Amber, now is time for our 3 gold stars.
1, letting go of the word should. Instead, why are you doing this? Be intentional about it. Are you doing things because you want to, or are you doing things because you feel like you have to? 2, duality. And is our favorite word. So I can be sad and I can be grateful. So remember that it's okay to feel all the things that you need to feel, and that's what makes you you. And 3rd is self-compassion. Make sure that you are showing up for yourself and talking to yourself in the way that you would talk to the people that you love. Because if you are having that negative self-talk, it's really going to impact the way that you feel about yourself and the way that you exude out to the rest of the world. So be kind to yourself.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. All right. Next up is Unleashing Ivy. These are our rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm a little anxious, but all right.
I was waiting for you to say that. What is your favorite way to move anxiety out of you?
I love to be outside in nature. So hiking or running or walking. And definitely doing that with a really good playlist. I'm also really into my Peloton right now. So those are like my go-to when I need to move my body.
Yeah. I like the natural remedies.
Mm-hmm. All right. And as a parent, what advice would you give to someone whose child is really struggling with anxious thoughts, ruminating thoughts, or kind of losing sleep when they're anxious?
Yeah. So, explain to your child that, feelings aren't factual, and allowing them to be able to separate, like, this is how I'm feeling, and give them the space to do that. I think making it normalizing, talking about feelings and emotions is really helpful. Doing that by modeling. So like sometimes mommy feels anxious right now, or mommy feels anxious when I'm doing this. Do you ever feel anxious when you're doing this? What does that feel like for you? Like, do you feel it in your stomach? So kind of talking them through it and making it kind of like this normal thing so that they're able to express how they're feeling, and giving them the outlet to explain how they're feeling and feeling safe doing it. Can be really game changer.
And just to kind of keep going off that, if your child says, I feel it in my heart, I know identifying it is, and just talking about it's helpful, but do you have a practice of like how to get that out? Like, oh, it's in your heart. Then what do you say?
Yeah. Okay. You're feeling it in your heart. What does that feel like? What's going on for you? And kind of asking them like, why are you feeling it in your heart? Just kind of getting more information, because sometimes they don't really know what that means. You know what I mean? Maybe are they sad right now? So like they feel like their heart is aching, do they need more of comfort or something going on at school? So kind of just being inquisitive and asking questions and allowing them to ask questions like, what do you think that is? Like, why do you think that's happening? Nikki, who I do the podcast with, has a really great kids book on thoughts called A Thought is a Thought. And it kind of helps kids learn how to reframe those thoughts and those anxious feelings. And there's a bunch of exercises in that. So it's really great.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Put it in my cart.
We'll link that in the show notes. That's amazing. All right. And last question. What is one thing you wish you would have known sooner?
Oh, one thing I wish I would have known sooner. That my worth is not based on my productivity. I think I spent too long trying to live up to these standards, or thinking that if I wasn't always going or doing or creating, then I didn't matter. And I think it's something that I still struggle with. I struggle with like, it's okay to just not do anything right now. So I wish that was taught and allowed for me earlier in life, and the importance of like, I'm just worthy because I am, and not I have to be doing something or showing something or have something to give all the time.
Beautiful.
God, that's something that everyone needs to hear on repeat throughout the entire day.
Yeah. And speaking of on repeat, I feel like this is the type of episode that you listen to it once and you hear a couple of things that are helpful, and then you listen to it again and then you hear something else that you can take. And so I feel like this is going to be one of those episodes that I'm like, okay, I listened to it 2 weeks ago, but I need it again because I know we talked about this. And so just for our listeners, feel free to re-listen to this episode for your friend that's struggling, or for yourself, or for your kid, or for just tips on how to tune into, what you need, whether you're an anxious person or you have anxious thoughts. I mean, we all randomly have them. And so, take what you need from this episode and come back as many times as you need.
Yes. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been absolutely amazing.
Yes. Yes, you are going to help so many people. And just, I think the more that we normalize these feelings, the more we set people free, we can just talk open and honestly about what we're experiencing. And I feel like we don't have to have the guilt and shame anymore about feeling anxious.
Amen. All right. Let's leave our listeners with a piece of gold.
Yes, my favorite quote is by Maya Angelou, and it's, you can't control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. And in a time where we always want to be in control, we have to remember that we are only in control on how we show up. So what do we want that to be? And what do we want to put out into the world? And how do we want to feel?
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.